What do people say about Jesus Christ today? Most of the time, how you answer that question is based on what others in your life are saying right now or how they're living their lives right now. Maybe it's based on the Bible that you are reading from, and you've extended that research to even look at other documents, other pieces of writings that conclude that Jesus Christ was who he says that he was, or at least he was a real person that we can continue to examine. Were his words true? But there are people in this world that deny that Jesus even was a man, that he existed. Not only was he not Christ, or he was not the Son of God, he never existed to begin with. There were people who were alive at the time of Christ, and they wrote down what they saw and what they believed. And even when people saw Jesus, were in his presence, some believed, and some rejected it. Some never come to believe that Jesus was the Christ based on the evidence that they saw. But some, their lives were changed in that moment. When Jesus Christ died, when he was buried, when he was resurrected, their lives after that moment was changed. It was transformed. I pray that we as Christians live our lives in such a way that when you examine the evidence and come to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, you'll see why we live the lives that we live. Because there were people who were alive after Jesus, but they saw how Christians were living their lives. They saw the change that happened in Christians. And even though some Christians were being persecuted, they still maintained their belief that Jesus is the Son of God, that it was worth them dying for that person, that it was worth them dying for that belief. And very many people in this world will die for a lie. They just won't give up their lives. They just won't change everything. And for many, to reject the ways of the world and to live as Christ lived is a sacrifice. And many times we do that as Christians. But you see, there were people who were alive after the life of Jesus, after he was dead. But based on the way Christians were living their lives, they can conclude that Jesus must have been a real person, and we could examine to see if he was the Son of God. Even the Roman soldiers in Matthew chapter 27, it says in verse 54, when the centurion and those with him were guarding Jesus, they saw the earthquake and all that had happened. They were terrified. And they exclaimed, surely he was the Son of God. Romans were wonderful at crucifixion. They knew how to kill a person. They were very good at it, and they did it often. And so you would think that these Roman soldiers would not think anything different about this day. But something happened on this day that moved them to at least make this statement. Surely he was the Son of God. Because something happened. The evidence supported something that they saw that was different. If you are a non-believer and you question the life of Christ, I hope that you will at least examine the evidence. It is my prayer that the way that Christians are living out their faith today will cause you to at least examine the evidence. But please, don't judge whether Jesus was a real person or whether he was the Son of God or his words are true based on how a Christian lives their life. We are weak. We fall. We fail. We mess up. And many times you may not see us repent and recognize that. So please examine the evidence for what the evidence is. This morning in our Bible study, we have a Thursday morning Bible study with the men, and we're studying a book called Convicted by Brad Harrop. And Caleb was teaching, and it was just a great study this morning. And we were examining the evidence and support that Jesus was a real man and that he died on the cross. Now, Thomas Martin, he spoke up. Now, I'm not calling him old, but he says he was 13 when JFK was shot. He says, I saw it. I knew that it happened. Today, we're still trying to uncover the reasons he was killed. And we're looking at all kinds of conspiracy theories. But the fact remains, Thomas said, JFK was dead. JFK was shot. We saw that. And while people are examining all the evidence of why and the conspiracy theories, he still died. I think the same thing is true with Jesus Christ. You can't conclude that he didn't exist and that he died. Evidence can support that there were eyewitnesses to that fact that it happened. I couldn't tell Thomas, well, Thomas, I wasn't there, so I didn't see him die. Therefore, it's not true. I believe Thomas is real. I believe Thomas was once 13 years old, and that is about the same time that JFK was shot. So that could be reality. So now I can support that. And then we have to examine the other evidence to see what is true about why he was killed. So many people, they just are going to conclude that Jesus did not exist. But those that acknowledge he lived and died, because there is historical evidence that support, they may still reject that he was anything more than a good man. Some may reject the lifestyle that would be required of them if they obey the teachings. So they're going to reject any conclusive evidence to the contrary. I want to ask a question. Can we live our lives in a way that future generations who write about the year 2025, that there were people who believed in Jesus and they worshiped him and they lived with such convictions that despite what the world accused them of, they still lived out the principles set forth by Jesus Christ? Let's get personal. What will your children say about your faith? What will they say about how you lived out your life? Facebook. In recognition that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God. What about your spouse? What will your spouse say about your faith? Will your spouse be a believer because you are? Because you live out the evidence that you knew? What about your coworkers? Do your coworkers see your faith? See you act out that faith in such a way that may cause them to ask, why do you do what you do? Why do you act the way that you do? And it causes them to want to examine the evidence of Jesus Christ. Are you living your life that way? What about your enemies? Would people that don't even like you not be able to deny that you were one who lived by godly principles? 1 Peter 2 verse 12, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits us. Regardless of what the world says about Jesus Christ, regardless of whether they deny that Jesus is the Christ, they've looked at the evidence just like you have, and they've concluded that Jesus is not true. What will they say about you? What will they say about your convictions? What will they say? Because, see, it doesn't really matter what they say. It depends on what God thinks. Does God know that you are a believer? And I believe when he knows that, then we in turn, we go out into the world and we live it out in a way that may help others come to see Jesus differently. Because we know that in other writings. Once again, we're looking in this book, and Brad Harrop does a good job of bringing out people who were friendly towards Christians, that they believed that Jesus was the Christ. But he also brought out that there were people that were more hostile to that belief, that even though Jesus could have been a real man, that he could have been the Son of God, they don't recognize that. They were not necessarily believers. They were not Christians. And many even poked fun, made fun of, wrote about Christians for entertainment purposes. Many that might do that today. There was Lucian, who was a Greek writer, and he was born around AD 120. So that was about 90 years after the life of Christ. And he was writing about Christians alive in his lifetime. This is what he wrote. He scornfully wrote, "The Christians, you know, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites and was crucified on that account." You see, these misguided creatures start with the general conviction that they are immortal for all time, which explains the contempt of death and voluntary self-devotion, which are so common among them. And then it was impressed on them by their original lawgiver that they deny the gods of Greece and worship the crucified sage and live after his laws. See, he was not a Christian. But he could not deny how the Christians lived their lives and who they lived for. Does the church do the same thing today? Do we do a good job of living out the life of Jesus Christ when people see us? Jesus would tell his disciples, and he tells us today in John 13, verse 35, by this all men will know you are my disciples if you love one another. We need to be a body of believers that love one another to the point that others see it, that we're supporting each other, that we're looking out for one another, that we're taking care of each other. And other people in this world would want to be a part of that body because of how much we love each other, because of how much Jesus loved us, and how much we believe that Jesus is the Christ. Even in the Old Testament, Joshua chapter 24, verse 15, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. It doesn't matter what the rest of the world is doing. You can worship whoever you want to, but as for me and my household, I choose God. I choose Jesus. I choose to live after the principles that I've come to believe are true. And if we as Christians, if we want to make a difference in this world, if we want to make an impact for Jesus Christ, simply live it out. Live out the truth that you know it to be. There was Pliny the Younger, the governor of Bithynia, and he was writing at the same time in a letter written around 112 A.D. to an emperor, Trajan. Pliny stated, they, or the Christians, were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ, as to a God, and bound themselves by a solemn oath not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit fraud, theft, adultery, never to falsify their word, not to deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it. You see, more evidence could be given, but the case has been unquestionably made that Jesus Christ walked on the earth. His earthly evidence can be denied only by those pre-committed to a denial of the evidence and facts. Even the Jews acknowledge his existence. Even the Greeks acknowledged his existence. Even the non-believers of their day and their time wrote that Jesus was, in fact, a real person who lived, and many of them credit that to the lives that the Christians were living today. Do you acknowledge his existence? One way to do that is based on the way that you live your life.